If you lived in North America in the 70s, the words Ford Granada meant this. But if you're from Europe, and specifically the UK, the Granada means this. The Granada completed the transformation of Ford's stodgy 1960s image with a complete lineup of daring car designs for an affordable price. But why was it initially called the Ford Consul in the UK, and why did it all go wrong with the Ford Scorpio in the 1990s? This is the Ford Granada story. In the 1960s, Ford's large car in the UK was the Zephyr, which Ford marketed with upmarket Zodiac and executive models. On the continent, Ford made the completely different Ford Taurus. But Ford was losing out in the large car market to Rover's P6 and the Triumph 2000, and on the continent there was competition from Opel, BMW and Mercedes. By 1968, Ford was revitalising its range with the new Escort, Mark III Cortina and Capri that would launch in just a year, so it made sense to produce a new large car for the whole of Europe for the 70s. And Ford was hoping its aggressive American styling would be popular throughout all of Europe, setting it apart from other European cars at the time. Ford would pour £50 million into the development of this new vehicle. They wanted to call the car the Granada, but they were threatened by a lawsuit from Granada Limited, a company that owned a TV studio, a chain of cinemas and TV rental shops. They worried Ford's Granada car would cause them negative publicity if something bad happened to it, like it started randomly exploding in the streets. With the threat of the lawsuit over the car, Ford chose to call upper spec cars the Granada, with lower spec cars called the Consul. It's likely Ford was hedging its bets. It wanted to use the Granada name around the world, but if this wasn't possible, it could use the Consul name in Europe, a name it had used since the 50s. The new car would have independent rear suspension and a range of engines from 1.7 litres to 3 litres. Although it got better disc brakes at the front, it would retain drum brakes at the rear. The car would be both a saloon, coupe and estate. The previous Ford Zephyr estate was produced by outside companies, but the Granada estate would be done by Ford themselves. It would be produced in both Cologne in West Germany and Dagenham in the UK. The Ford Granada was launched in 1972 and was an immediate hit, being well received by the motoring press. They compared it favourably to more expensive cars like the BMW and heaped praise on its suspension, beating the hydropneumatic Citroën DS. Suddenly the Rover and Triumph were looking old-fashioned, and Ford played up its exotic continental image. Its promotional footage even threw some casual sexism in for good measure.
Still, it doesn't matter if you have an obliging lady wife who'll fetch your car for you in the mornings. Perhaps she does it because she knows it's one of the rare chances you'll have to drive it.
Customers loved the fresh styling, and it was a hit with fleet managers and taxi companies, allowing Ford to take significant inroads into the luxury car market. Ford now had a full, compelling and inexpensive range, from the Escort through Cortina to the Granada, and companies could use Ford as a one-stop shop. The car was exported to countries such as South Africa, where Ford worked their magic by installing the Mustang 5-litre V8 engine, giving it a 0 to 60 time of around 8 seconds and a 128 mph top speed, although the popular automatic gearbox sapped some of that power. The car was called the Piranha, and it was said that none other than Ford President Lee Iacocca used one as his daily driver. The car also found success as a police motorway cruiser, both in Mark I and Mark II variants. In 1973, Ford added a two-door saloon model on the continent, allowing the entry-level model to be just a little cheaper. The Granada was Ford's high-end luxury car, and Ford needed more than a fancy badge to tempt customers away from their Rovers, BMWs and Mercedes. They found it through Carrozzeria Ghia, the Italian design studio. Ghia had done work for Ford since the 50s with car designs such as the Lincoln Futura. If you think the Futura looks familiar, then you'll likely have seen it in its modified form as the Batmobile in the 1960s TV show. Ghia was bought by Ford in 1970 to become its in-house design studio, and its name was applied to high-end Fords and to the Granada in 1974. The Granada gear was meant to look significantly different from the regular car, with a much more luxurious level of trim, but cost-cutting meant only a few outside changes could be made. The cynical might say Ford were using the gear badge to sell its high-end models to its snobby customers, and there was an element of that. But Gear brought real skills in making a premium car that Ford could lean on to drive their cars upmarket both in Europe and North America. The Gear name would be used across the entire Ford range well into the 1980s. Ford's marketing team did their car proud, getting it featured in the Sweeney in 1974 and later in the Professionals. No longer just an executive cruiser, the Granada was a cool car that was helping to clean up the streets. This coincided with a small styling update for the 3-litre Gear model in the UK, an update that was extended to more models on the continent. Ford finally won its court case with Granada Limited in 1975, allowing them to drop the Consul name on the lower spec models. So just why was there a North American car called the Ford Granada, produced around the same time? Well, it's possible that Ford wanted to rationalise its European and North American cars, especially in light of the 1973 oil crisis, where fuel-efficient vehicles were becoming fashionable and European Fords used smaller engines. Ever since Ford started building cars in Europe, they've been looking to create world cars that would minimise development costs. Ford did investigate using the European Granada for their 1975 North American Ford Granada, but rejected it as the cost to make it street legal in North America was prohibitive. By 1976, production of the European Granada was moved solely to Germany in preparation for the updated Mark II Granada in 1977. The updated design took cues from Uwe Barnson's new styling, being used on the Cortina and new Fiesta. What's surprising is that although the car looked all new, it was merely a reskin of the Mark I car. Car design fashions changed quickly in the 1970s. They seem to stay relatively static today, with car companies coalescing around one low drag shape. The Mark II Granada dropped the coupe model, leaving just the saloon and estate. But to reduce costs, the estate's rear end was mostly carried over from the Mark I. The old Essex engines in the Mark I were replaced by newer 2.3-litre and 2.8-litre V6 Cologne models. For the first time, a diesel was added, mainly for the taxi market. The 2.8-litre Gear featured new Bosch fuel injection, making it a bit of a beast with a touch of opulence. In 1978, Ford worked with Hyundai to bring Granada production to South Korea. The car used a smaller 2-litre engine due to tax restrictions. Production ended in 1985 after selling almost 5,000 cars. Ford also produced and sold the car in Taiwan. The Gear design studio was frustrated they didn't have more influence over Ford's cars. They'd been restricted to trim changes, but they were able to do full car restyles. They showed off their prowess with the Gear Altair project in 1980. The car was a little larger than the Granada it was based on, but with a lower drag factor and angular styling that was popular at the time. It included a single windscreen wiper and covered headlights. But Ford wasn't interested in going in this direction and limited the Gear design studio to trim changes like the high-end Ford Granada Gear X Executive in 1981, a car that believed the more fancy names you could throw at a car, the fancier it would appear to the customer. With the luxury car market demanding high-end features, Ford added heated, electrically adjustable seats, air conditioning and electric windows and sunroof. Ford did a light facelift on the whole Granada line in 1981. But by the 1980s, other car companies were introducing their own high-end models. Image was important to the company executive, and they needed to be seen rolling up to clients with the right badge on the front. They were looking at German cars, with Mercedes and BMW being their top choice, and Audi's Vorsprung durch Technik adverts were making it a popular alternative. 1980s luxury car customers wanted German cars and wouldn't be seen dead in a car made by the same company that made the cheap Fiesta. Ford updated the car in 1985 and split their naming once more. In the UK and Ireland, the car remained the Granada due to the resistance over the Sierra name change and styling, but in Europe the car was renamed to the Scorpio. In the UK, top-spec Granadas were given the Scorpio badge. The car received a toned-down version of the Sierra jelly mold styling. But fuel economy figures had made colossal strides in just 13 years, thanks in part to better engine management and lower drag styling. Where the Mark I Granada got 18 miles per gallon, the new entry-level Granada would get 45 miles per gallon. The gear trim level was still used, but it was relegated to being a middle-range trim level. With German cars offering a high level of refinement, Ford pulled out all the stops with the Scorpio model. With headlamp wash, variable assist power steering, a heated front screen, trip computer, headphone jacks in the back, and electrically reclining rear seats. ABS was standard across all cars, quite unusual at the time. The car won the European Car of the Year in 1986. The new car used a new chassis, based on a stretched version of the Ford Sierra. It used 1.8 litre and 2 litre Pinto engines, but by 1989 these were replaced by better 2 litre 8-valve double overhead cam engines. Peugeot 2.5 litre diesel engines were also available. A 2.9 litre 24-valve Cosworth V6 was added in 1990, giving it a 0 to 60 time of 8.1 seconds, quite a good time for such a heavy car. The car was initially only available as a hatchback, which hurt sales, but Ford added a saloon in 1989 along with an estate in 1992. The new version was also still sold in Taiwan. The North American Granada had been phased out in 1982, but Ford brought the Scorpio back to American shores in 1987 as the Merkur Scorpio. It was only available as a hatchback as the saloon hadn't yet been launched in Europe. Despite good reviews, sales were disappointing, with just 22,000 sold, and the Scorpio and the Sierra XR4 Ti were discontinued in 1989. But the Ford Granada Scorpio was struggling with sales against the German triad of Audi, BMW and Mercedes. Ironic as the car was designed and built in Germany. But Ford had a plan to beat the Germans at their own game. In 1990, Ford purchased Jaguar with the goal of transforming it into a volume luxury car maker. The Granada Scorpio got a small facelift in 1992 before a more major redesign in 1994, where the Granada name was finally dropped. There were many who didn't like the new styling, with the front given a pair of sad bulbous eyes. The rear had a transatlantic flair to it, but it looked out of place on European roads, and a far cry from the exciting and well-proportioned transatlantic styling of the Granada Mark I. The estate just looked dull, like an enlarged Ford Mondeo. We've never found out who designed this car, as Ford never made the culprit's name public. Ford was so concerned about the bold styling that months before its release they held a meeting with the motoring press. They explained in great detail why this car was beautiful and forward-thinking and not ugly at all. But it's never a good sign when you have to call a meeting to explain a car's styling. It didn't work, of course. If you want to read just some of the motoring press's scathing remarks, pause the video right now. The trim levels were Executive, Gear and Ultima, and it used the updated versions of the 2 litre, 2.3 litre and 2.9 litre engines from the Mark I Scorpio. With customers looking at other large cars like Ford's own Galaxy minivan, BMW, Audi and Mercedes sales going from strength to strength, sales of this awkward looking car were disappointing at just 95,000 sold, and production ended in 1998. Ford threw their money and marketing behind their new luxury saloon, the Jaguar S-Type. Just a year later, Ford purchased Volvo, allowing them to also sell the Volvo S80 saloon and V70 estate. To get early advert-free access to new videos or to appear in the credits, please consider supporting me using the Patreon link below from just $1 or 80p a month, and hit that subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.